Hey there, everybody. Today we are going to be covering everything you need to know about defense. So, as many of you probably know, the bulk of my work over the last year or so that I've spent investigating the inner workings of the game has been relating to defense. I've done a lot of work both in the simulation module, testing things out in games, etc. And I would probably consider myself at this point the foremost expert on defense of everybody who is sharing their knowledge about the game. So, with that in mind, I hope I can give you guys some tips in a more simple manner that will allow you to improve your teams. So, the first thing you need to know, and this is probably the most important thing to know, is that the positional rating tool in the game is not accurate. Now, I am a frequent preacher of the fact that you should not evaluate players on their overall rating. It's a nice way to find people, just like the positional rating could sometimes be a nice way to find people, but you still want to focus more on the individual pieces that form the positional rating. Now, I've got a training calculator at this point that will tell you what training percentage a player is at based on their ratings and their positional rating. So you plug your player into that, and that's really the only thing you need positional rating for. It's completely irrelevant in how a player actually performs. Now, things that matter are what their positional rating breaks down to. For catchers, that's catcher ability and catcher arm. For infielders, that's infield range, infield error, turn double plays, and infield arm. For outfielders, that's outfield range, outfield error, and outfield arm. And those are what you really need to be focusing on. So I have on my projection system a weighted positional rating system that will take your players' ratings and tell you what their actual quality is at the position. Completely unrelated to how the game is going to calculate it, because this is going to be much more accurate for how you can actually expect them to play. Now, you don't need a weighted position rating in your player evaluation, but just keep in mind that you need to be evaluating guys based on their individual ratings, not their overall position rating. That is very, very important. Now, the next thing you need to know is which positions are actually important defensively, which positions are more important defensively than the others, and which positions you may be able to focus on offense at. So I've got these broken down into three categories, and we're going to go through each of them. So of extreme importance defensively. Now these are positions where defense is much more important than offense. It's nice to have offense at these positions, but offense is the same value at every position. If you got a great hitting shortstop, that's the same as having a great hitting first baseman. But if you have a great fielding shortstop, that is way more valuable than a great fielding first baseman. So at this point, the defense has just become so incredibly important that offense falls way off in terms of its relative importance at these positions. So the first one is, of course, shortstop. Now, according to my calculations, shortstop is just incredibly, insanely important. Range, air, arm, and turn double plays at the position are all incredibly impactful on your team's runs allowed. Range and arm, in particular, are extremely essential to having a good defense. If you have a shortstop with range less than 70, you're hurting yourself. Range is far and away at shortstop the most important rating in the game defensively. It's incredibly, I honestly cannot say it enough. Shortstop is just so important. You cannot afford to be running anything less than an insanely good fielder at this position. If you have to, completely throw offense by the wayside to get somebody who is capable of manning shortstop to a high level. There's no easier way to win more games than picking up a really strong fielding shortstop who can hit even just a little bit. Just somebody who can hold their own in that number 9 spot in your order and absolutely be a force to be reckoned with defensively. The second most important position, also of extreme importance, is catcher. Now, the irony is that catcher only has 2 ratings with which to make themselves important, and catcher arm just is not super important. It's a valuable rating. It's just well behind a catcher ability in terms of what it does for your defense. Now, catcher arm is going to essentially prevent stolen base attempts. You'll occasionally pick guys off at the plate, or not at the plate, at their bases after a pitch, but it's not necessarily a very valuable rating. Now, the fact that catcher ability is so important that it single-handedly brings catcher up to the second most important position defensively should tell you just how important that rating is. Now, what does catcher ability actually do? Well, it increases the strikeouts of your pitching staff and it decreases the walks of your pitching staff. So you're striking out more guys, allowing fewer walks, essentially much fewer base runners, and that is the thing you're primarily trying to prevent in baseball is base runners. You're trying to get outs and prevent base runners. Catchers do that better than just about every other position. Just catcher ability by itself is the second most important rating in the game. Now, by the way, the fact that catcher ability, which single-handedly has catcher second, is the second most important rating behind shortstop range should tell you just how important shortstop is. It's insane how much you can prevent balls in play from being hits just by having a strong shortstop. Anyways, with catchers, catcher ability will also slightly increase the number of balls in play they can convert to outs, but it is really all about the strikeouts of the walks, especially in modern games where you have a lot of really high stuff pitchers and a lot of really or relatively lower control pitchers. Catcher ability can really save those guys with the lower control and absolutely turn into dominators, the guys with top shelf stuff. That stuff just gets a multiplier on it, and when you get to those guys with insane levels of stuff, that just goes way off when you have a higher catcher ability guy. Now, with catcher ability, I'm genuinely going to say if you're not running one of the 5 highest catcher ability players in your league, you're doing something wrong. Catcher ability should be prioritized well above everything else at the position. At shortstop, you can kind of make an argument for building a well-balanced player if you've got a lot of guys that are similar, but with catcher, you just cannot get by without having a very, very, very strong defensive catcher. Austin Hedges, he's a garbage hitter in live starts. He has absolutely nothing going for him. But because his defense is so strong, he is one of the best catchers in the game and my recommended acquisition for most teams. And the last position of extreme importance defensively is center field. So these are your up the middle positions. Second base is the only thing left out here, but center field range is almost exclusively what's carrying this position. Now there is some value to error and arm, probably about on par with catcher arm, but it's all in the range at center field, and that is all you should be focusing on when choosing your center fielder. You can, like shortstop, try to balance it a little bit with offense. If anything, center field is the position out of these three you're going to look for somebody who can hit a little bit at. But it is one where you absolutely have got to prioritize that defense. Make sure you have one of the premier fielders in the league at center field, notably in range. Make sure you have one of the rangiest outfielders in the league as your center fielder. It will make a massive difference on your runs prevented. Now, shortstop and center field, notably, adjacent positions can kind of intertwine a little bit. So if you have a really great fielding shortstop and a really great fielding third baseman, the value of those two players is a little bit less defensively. But because shortstop and center field are not adjacent, catcher at that, these three positions have absolutely got to be prioritized. They are the foundations, the building blocks of your defense, respectively, for your pitching staff, your infield, and your outfield in terms of preventing hits, and preventing strikeouts, or preventing walks and adding strikeouts. I honestly cannot overstate how much of an impact it will make, how many more games you will win just by transitioning to the best fielders you can get at these positions. Now, the next category is positions where defense is approximately equal in value to offense. The top position on this list, defense, is still more valuable than offense. The bottom position, you start to see offense kind of outvalue defense. But the fact is, you cannot focus on offense exclusively at these positions. You have to look for a balance. What is this player's overall value like between their offense and defense is the question you're asking most strongly for these positions where it can make a significant difference on your runs prevented to have a good fielder or a bad fielder, respectively. But it can also make you kind of need to start looking at how you're getting your run production, and these might be positions where you try to do it. So I generally recommend trying to find balanced players, guys who can hold their own defensively at the least, but are also strong hitters. And the first primary one at this position is third base, which you can almost throw into the extreme importance category. range, air, and arm at third base are all incredibly important. Turn down plays, you could just forget about it. But the other three ratings make a massive impact on your defense. And I'm sure a lot of people are surprised to hear that third base is stronger than second base. I know a lot of my fellow data analysts didn't believe me at first when I told them that third base is more valuable than second base. But you test it in any environment pretty much, and you get third base is stronger, more important defensively. And I honestly cannot state enough the importance of making sure your third baseman has a cannon for an arm. Range and arm, like a shortstop, are incredibly important at third base. Your third baseman, generally speaking, should be a strong hitting shortstop who's not cut out for shortstop, or just somebody who's got really good range, air, and arm. And it's nice to have offense at third base, but make sure defense is what is coming first. If you have somebody who's an above average or a strong fielder and an above average hitter, that's better than somebody who's an above average fielder and a strong hitter at third base. Now, second base. That's a position where I start to balance my offense and defense very evenly. I'm looking at both, kind of deciding what's the overall value of this guy going to be. Is he a strong enough fielder? Is he a strong enough hitter? Do those two things combined make him better than these other options? And it's still important, very important defensively, but it is also a position where you can't necessarily start bringing out a really bad hitter. I'd say second base is where I'd start saying you need to get at least some offensive production to make sure you're scoring at least a decent amount of runs per game. And with a strong shortstop, it's not going to kill you too much to skip out on second base a little bit. It's definitely one where I would say range is far more important than anything else. Make sure you at least have a second baseman whenever you can with at least 60 range. 65 is very preferable. If you could get higher, that's great. And just make sure you understand that it's still a valuable position defensively. Right field is the last position in this category. If you've got a strong defensive center fielder, you might argue that it should belong in the next category. If you have a really, really, really rangy center fielder that can make up for having a right fielder and left fielder, your corner outfielders who are just not necessarily as good defensively. But right field, when you can have a strong fielder and your center fielder is not just off the rails with the range, can make a very significant impact on your defense. Now, arm and range are both important in right field, but range is way, way, way more important than arm. Air also has minor importance, but it is all about the range and arm. And it's definitely a position where I'm not going to go with a poor hitter. I would like to see at least some offensive production from right field. If I have to give up some defense to get it, so be it. Offense does start to outvalue defense at this point in our rankings defensively, and you have to get your production from somewhere. If you're not going to be able to get it with that defense from other top positions, you absolutely have got to get it at right field. And obviously, defense is valuable. In some tournaments, in Perfect Team, you'll see guys running strong fielders over much better hitters because it is very significant. If you have a less effective center fielder, you almost have to have a strong right fielder to help make up for that. But this is definitely a position where you are seeking some kind of balance. If you can, you'd like to see a little bit of defense with the offense. And now for the last category of positions, the ones where defense matters much less. The first position, it still has some impact on your team's success. But outside of that, you start to worry about other things entirely. So the first one is left field. Now, you can argue that under some circumstances, left field might deserve to go up a category. It's not too much less important than right field. I'd say right field is maybe like 1.2 times more important than left field defensively. Range is all that matters in left field, a lot like center field. And really big thing with left field is do not go below average range. You don't want to go below on the 20 to 80, 1 to 100 scale, the 50 mark, because it will punish you badly. The game does heavily punish you for going below that in left field. Even with a very strong center fielder, you are going to see massive drop-offs in your defensive production if you really skimp out on left field defense. But if you meet the minimum, it is much tougher to add value defensively by increasing your range. An elite left fielder is still going to win you probably a game and a half more than a mediocre left fielder, so it's valuable to have that defense, but it's a nice thing to have. It's a luxury. You want the offense in left field. You definitely have got to make sure, because at this point there's only 3 positions left where you can get offensive production, and you got to have it from somewhere. So left field has got to be one of those positions. Do not underestimate the value of left field defense. Do not underestimate how badly you will be punished for going under that average range, because it is ridiculous. Um, but just make sure you are respecting the fact that left field can still be valuable. Now, the remaining positions, there's essentially no defensive value to be had. First base, the difference between your worst possible guys and your best possible guys is probably 0.75 wins. You want to go all in on the offense. It doesn't really matter what the defense looks like. Get a strong hitter. You need your offensive production, and first base has got to be one of those places you get it at. I honestly, I'm not going to say entirely ignore defense, but really only consider it if you've got 2 guys who are incredibly similar in their offensive capabilities production-wise, and defense is the tiebreaker. Like, it's literally the last thing I'd look at on a first baseman. I would first look at production, then cost, and then if they're the identical production and cost, then defense becomes the tiebreaker, really, at that point. It's just not something I would strongly consider looking at them. And next, we've got pitchers. Now, the impact defensively of a pitcher existed. It's just even less at first base. It's going to be basically one of those things. And pitchers play fewer innings than any other position defensively, so yeah, your pitcher, just don't worry about the defense. Look at their ability to pitch. It's completely irrelevant. Well, not completely irrelevant. Once again, like first base, it would be a tiebreaker. If you have 2 guys who are identical, and I mean identical down to the point in terms of production and cost, then defense becomes the tiebreaker, and it's a very minor tiebreaker. Frankly, even to be that, I'd probably need a pitcher with like 40 range versus a pitcher with 20 or something like that. It needs to be significant to even count as a tiebreaker, because pitching is just, you don't worry about defense at all. The last position is designated hitter. Designated hitters only play the field. You're literally just looking for the best hitter you can get at the position. I don't think I need to explain that anymore. They don't even have any ratings that come into play. Now, it's nice if you have a DH who can back up another position, but it's not something you really need to have. All right, now on to general tips that are completely unrelated to positions and everything else. Now, the first one is very general. Do not discount strong defense. I know a lot of people love their hitting. They will skimp out at many positions, and then they wonder why their teams are not as successful as some of the other people. And, well, it's very self-explanatory. You didn't go with strong defense. You went with strong offense. And it is incredibly easy to build a very strong team with a mediocre offense if you're just acquiring undervalued pitchers and strong fielders. I'd estimate that you could get just about any team to 90 plus wins just by doing that strategy, acquiring the strong fielders and the very undervalued pitchers. On the other side of things, it is impossible to build an elite team without an incredibly strong defense. Now, I saw a while ago somebody was making a post about, well, maybe we overvalue defense. Maybe we are putting too much emphasis into it. Maybe there are other ways to win. And yeah, sure, if you have like, he literally built a team with an MVP caliber hitter and a loaded offense where almost everybody was at least all-star plus caliber hitting talent. And he only eclipsed the 100-win mark one time in his 10-year test. He missed the playoffs 5 times. That should not be happening if your offense is actually that strong. And if it is, then your offense shouldn't be that strong. You should have a better defense. If you just replaced the hitters with terrible hitters who had much stronger fielding at the premium positions, he would have probably seen his team increase its success to like 115 wins a year because it really makes that much of a difference to have the strong defense. You cannot have those extreme levels of success with strong defense. And another way to put this is imagine how successful you are with an offense focused team. Now, add about 10 wins to that, and that's what you could get by focusing on defense. It is just so impactful. And it really bothers me when people try to claim that defense is overvalued by the community. I have worked for a year plus to get the community to value defense. I feel like I've done a good job. I think a lot of people are on board the defense is important train, and it should be that way. I have extensive evidence to prove that defense is extremely valuable. A lot of the people who are trying to claim that defense is not valuable, like this one, or not as valuable as we think it is, are coming to a point where their evidence that they supply actually proves the opposite of what they're trying to say. I promise you guys that defense is just as good as I'm saying it is. I honestly cannot overstate how important it is to make sure you have a strong defense on your team. Now, the next point here, do not go too exclusively into defense. Now, I'm not saying that I'm overvaluing defense or that you should back off of it. What I'm saying is that if you've got a player who's slightly stronger fielder but a much worse hitter than the guy you're running now, the guy you're running now is better. You have to look at the overall value of a player. Now, defense is a huge part of that. That gets discounted by some people, but offense is still a part of it. Uh, your shortstops, like the thing that distinguishes some of the better shortstops is not the defense, because that's what the bare minimum is to be a very strong shortstop. It's the offense. If you've got somebody like Francisco Lindor who hits significantly better than somebody like Andrelton Simmons, that's the separator. You see the shortstops who can really hit with that strong defense become among the best players in the game. And on the other side of that spectrum, don't pick up a fielder who's just an absolute garbage hitter that's never going to reach base or do anything offensively because they are so good defensively. It takes a lot of defense to make that more valuable than your next best option, who's probably going to be only a little bit worse fielding and much better hitting. And probably about the same price at that. Now, if you have a little bit of trouble balancing offensive value with defensive value, MOPS is a great tool. My projection system will tell you approximately how players' defense is going to balance with their offense. Now, it may not be fully accurate for every environment. I'm working on trying to make it more accurate, even just for the plain old live environments. It's not 100% or even anywhere near it on those. It's still a very good projection system, of course, for live environments, but what it really does well is tell you how valuable a player is going to be and how their defensive and offensive values sort of combine for an overall value. Our next point here is a run saved is better than a run earned. Now, you hear that a run earned is as good as a run saved or vice versa. This is not true. It's objectively better to have a stronger defense and prevent a run at the cost of a stronger offense costing you a run. And the reason is this. By Pythagorean winning percentage, runs scored divided by runs scored plus runs allowed equals winning percentage. So I think I misspoke there. Runs scored squared divided by runs scored squared plus runs allowed squared is equal to your winning percentage or your expected winning percentage. So plugging numbers into this formula, if you have 700 runs scored / allowed per game, so that's about 4.35 runs scored and allowed a game, pretty average for some teams, you'd have a 500 winning percentage. Now, if you increase your runs scored to 800 runs, and you keep your runs allowed at 700, your winning percentage does increase to 56.6%. That's a playoff caliber team. That's great. But if you decrease your runs allowed by 100 and drop that to 600 runs per game allowed, now your winning percentage is 57.6%. That's a whole percent better, or more than a game and a half difference. So that's like the basic way to put it is if you're managing to prevent, that's essentially 10 WAR. So let's say if you're managing to have, you have the choice between a guy who's a 10 WAR hitter and a 10 WAR fielder. And the 10 WAR fielder is actually an extra win and win 0.65, I'd estimate, better than your 10 war hitter. Think of this more of as a cumulative thing because you're not actually going to have this bonus um, with your individual players where you have a legitimate 10 war hitter or fielder. That would be crazy. But say at shortstop, center field, and catcher, you're preventing 100 runs more than you would without those positions. Let's say you had decent fielders and or good fielders and you upgraded them to strong fielders at those positions. That's probably about 100 win or 100 runs difference at least. You're actually preventing, or you're actually winning rather than translating that to however many wins it is, an extra win and a half or so, which is a very significant difference. So I don't actually have a weight for this yet where runs prevented are more important than runs scored, but I probably will at some point because it is a legitimately significant difference. Now, if you think about it logically, that makes sense as well. If you decrease your runs scored, runs allowed, and you just keep doing it, you score 100 more runs than you allow. If you get down to 0 runs allowed, you're winning every single game. And this is because your percentage of runs, the percentage of runs scored in each game is more favoring you the fewer runs are scored total, as long as you have the advantage in the runs scored totals. Because essentially you are at a point where your opponents just cannot score enough runs to win. It really is that simple. You are scoring a larger total or a larger portion of the runs per game. Anyways, our next point here is the value of a player who's both an elite fielder and an elite hitter is essentially invaluable. It's something that just cannot be overstated because you cannot find that production elsewhere. At first base, that's just having the best year you can have. At other positions, I mean, it's like you get that elite offensive output that you are looking for at other positions, but you're also getting the elite defensive output that you're looking for at your position there, and you get the overall player who is just going to give you value that no other team can get. It's difficult to kind of put it into words, but it's a building block of your team that's going to add value that you literally cannot make up elsewhere. It's just, if you have, let's say the difference between, you have Andrelton Simmons' glove, but now Andrelton Simmons is also a 4-war hitter. That's going to be 4 wins that you can't get elsewhere because nobody is going to be able to provide a shortstop who can give that kind of value. Essentially, it's one of those things where if you have a player like that and you can acquire them reasonably, you have got to do it because their overall value is just going to be so ridiculous that it cannot be overstated. You see this in the base game in standard live starts, where my player ranking sheet has guys like Francisco Lindor and Fernando Tatis ranked really, 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 really highly compared to guys like Juan Soto and Mike Trout, who are much stronger hitters because their defensive and offensive value combined to be just so crazy that it separates them from everybody else. And the last thing that I'm going to say here is building a strong defensive team is much cheaper and easier than building a strong offensive team. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but when you're trying to win year one in a live start, the best way to do it is picking up all the best fielders and those undervalued pitchers, which is something I need to make a video about at some point because they are everywhere and they are really good. But guys like Andrelton Simmons, Austin Hedges, Manuel Margot, Devin Marrero, they could be picked up for pennies on the dollar, and they make ridiculous impacts on your team. Andrelton Simmons is a top 10 player in overall value on my sheet, and you could get him for basically nothing from the Twins when you boot up a game because they just do, for whatever reason, they just do not value him accurately. And you see that with a lot of these very strong defensive players. They will seriously make, I mean, these aren't just guys who are going to really increase your defensive production. They're guys who are literally among the best players in the game, and you can acquire them super cheap. Defense is very undervalued still. Um, it's been historically even more undervalued, but it still is undervalued. And if you're trying to win, the easiest way, the cheapest way to do it, you can do it with just about any payroll, is to get those strong fielders. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. I hope this video is really helpful for you guys in your attempts to build strong teams. I'll see you later, and yeah.